everybody, this is Mark Berkey from Berkey Academy, and I'm getting ready to show you a series of videos about my computer build. Now, a couple of things I need to tell you. First, this video is not great quality. The sound is terrible. The video quality is terrible. I had two cameras going and both of them were set to very low resolution. I apologize for that. Also, I shot this video when I was building this computer back in February of 2018. Here it is in August 2018, and I finally decided that even though I had terrible quality audio and the video wasn't that great, that I would edit it together because maybe it will benefit someone. I want to thank Dr. Stephanie Kelly for helping me with the camera work, and let's get going. The first thing I want to do really quickly is just give you an idea about the cost. So on this Excel spreadsheet here, we can see two builds compared. One is the computer I call Dragon, which I built back in 2012, and I made some videos about building that as well. I'll try to include a link in the video description, just to kind of help you compare what are the differences in costs, what are the differences in the types of components you might put in a computer like this, and what are the differences in speed as well. So just real quickly give you an idea here. Whenever I build a computer, what I do is I buy components as I find good deals over the course of 3 or 4 months. And I have the dates here where I purchased some of these things. The first thing I bought was the case. Got a really good deal on the case. And then I got a power supply because I wasn't quite sure what processor I wanted to use yet. Because you don't want to buy a motherboard or memory before you know what processor you're going to be using. So long story short, and as you'll see in the video, I ended up using the Intel i7-8700k, which at $375 is almost, not quite twice as expensive as the processor I was using, a Core i5-3570k, which was a really great processor, bargain price for what you got. And for about 5 years, this humble i5 processor was in the top 10 or 15 fastest processors out there for the consumer level. But finally, the 8700K, which has 6 cores and 12 threads, compared to the i5 that only has 4 cores and 4 threads, I decided, okay, I can justify doing the upgrade for a processor that is about 3 times as fast, or adding about 200% to the speed. So altogether, my computer I built in 2012 was about $1,300, and this one I'm spending about $1,500. Not a whole lot more expensive when you come down to it. Now, today, if we were to buy these, I looked at PCPartsPicker.com and put in all these parts. If I were to buy all these today, it'd be about $1,900. Back when I built this computer, if I were to buy all the parts on the day I built it, it would have been almost $2,200. Since that time, since February, the price of SSDs has come down quite a bit, and the price of memory has come down quite a bit as well. Most of the other parts are pretty similar. So keep in mind, the video quality is not great, the audio quality is not great, but it's good enough to where I think if you're interested in how to build a computer, this is not a build video for experts. This is a build video helping people understand the parts of computers, what they do, and how to build them. So if you're interested in that kind of video, come along for the ride. Hi everybody, welcome. This is Berkey Academy's 2018 computer build. I want to thank all my Patreon supporters for helping me buy all this stuff. It's going to help me be able to make and edit videos a lot better than with my 6-year-old machine now. So we're going to make a video here where we go through and we basically describe the major parts of a computer. We're going to do unboxings of all of this stuff to show you what it looks like. And then I'm going to put the computer together pretty quickly We'll probably divide this up into 3 or 4 chunks so it doesn't get too long. So let's get started. You see here on the table all the major stuff you need for a computer, but before we unbox, I want to just show you real quickly an overview of what the major parts of a computer are, and then when we do the unboxing, you'll be able to see what everything is. All right, let's go through the major parts of a computer. So when we do the unboxing and the assembly, you'll already know what's happening. So the main thing people think about when they think about a computer is the CPU, or the central processing unit. This is actually the smallest part of most computer builds, but it's the thing that does all the math. It takes care of all the ones and zeros, all the adding and subtracting and multiplying. And this is what you've probably heard of from companies like Intel or AMD are the main two CPU providers. We need to be able to feed information to the CPU and also have the CPU send information back very quickly. And what we use for that we call memory. So memory is the very fast temporary storage location. You can think about this as a hot storage location where the CPU reads things from the memory, writes things back to the memory very quickly. But when you turn a computer off, it's all gone. So this is just temporary working storage. You need more memory if you're going to be opening more tabs or playing larger video files, things like that. So the memory is the temporary, very fast storage. But also in a computer, you need long-term storage. So when you turn the computer off, not everything gets lost. So you need some long-term storage, like a hard drive. And hard drives use mechanical spinning metal platters to store the information on. Another version of this cold storage, long-term storage, is called a SSD, or a solid-state drive. And in this build, we're going to use both. The benefit of an SSD is that it's much faster than a hard drive. So if you have your Windows operating system and most of your programs on an SSD, your programs will load much faster, your computer will boot much faster. But you usually also want a hard drive. It's slower, but usually they're bigger for the cost. So we have the memory, the CPU, the cold storage for your programs and for your data. We also need a GPU, or graphics processing unit. A GPU is what does the calculations to display things on our monitor. Now, most CPUs, not all, but most CPUs have a very simple GPU built in them. And the processor that we're using from Intel has a very primitive GPU built in. But if you want to play really fancy 3D games, you're going to need a discrete or separate GPU. Now, the heart of the computer is what we call a motherboard. And a motherboard ties all these other components together. So the motherboard is basically a flat board, and you plug the GPU, the CPU, the memory, and you plug the hard drives and SSDs into the motherboard so that they can all communicate with each other. And the last two major components that you need for a computer build is you need some kind of box to put it all in. That's not absolutely necessary. You could just kind of leave everything sitting on a table or on a board if you really wanted to, but you need a computer case to put it in if you want it to look like a finished product. And then the other thing you need is a power supply to give all of these other parts power. And the power supply takes alternating current from the wall, and it turns that alternating current into direct current. 3.3 volts, 5 volts, and 12 volts. Different parts of the computer run on different voltages. So now that you see kind of the overall view of what the major parts of a computer are and kind of what their functions are, let's actually do the unboxing and see what these various parts actually look like. Okay, let's start with the CPU. In this build, we're using an i7-8700k from Intel. The K means it's unlocked, which means you can overclock it easily. 8700 is right now Intel's top-of-the-line processor that is going to cost you under $1,000 at least. This one I got for just a little bit under $400, and it has 6 processing cores and 12 threads. What that means is it has 6 physical processors that are independent of each other, but because each processor is a very complicated thing, and it can be doing more than one thing at a time. When you say 6 cores, 12 threads, that means that Intel allows you to use each processor twice at the same time. There are some processors, especially the i5 series, most of those will be either 6 cores, 6 threads. They don't allow you to do that multiple processing, and that's just so that they charge less money and you get less out of the processor. Or you could have a 4-core 4-thread or 4-core 8-thread, depending on whether they turn on this feature called hyper-threading that allows that multiple processing per core to go on. Now let's open this up and just get a view of what this looks like. And that's the processor. It's very, very tiny. You can see it compared to the size of my finger there. A lot of times people will point to the case of a computer and they will say, the CPU. That's not the CPU, that's your computer case that you're pointing at. Or sometimes people will point at the case of the computer and say, the hard drive. The case has all those parts in there. So let me see if I can get this out of here without making it go flying across the room here. Here it is in a little plastic protective shell. And when you look at the underside, you can see all these little tiny contacts there. Now this processor is an LGA1151. What that LGA1151 tells you, LGA stands for Land Grid Array. Land Grid Array just means that when you set this processor into a socket, it has a lot of little pins sticking up in the socket that meet these little tiny pads. And the 1151 tells you that there are 1,151 tiny little contacts there that the computer uses to communicate back and forth from the processor. So we're going to leave this in the protective shell until we are ready to install it. Now, when you have a processor like this, you need a cooler because these processors generate a lot of heat. This one, I believe, is a 95 watt part. So imagine about a 100 watt light bulb. If you put your hand on it, how much heat that generates. So you need some kind of cooling solution. Now, some Intel processors include a CPU cooler. This one does not, because this is a high-end one and they know that most people would not use the cheap cooler that they would include with it anyway. So here I have the Cryorig H7. This cooler costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $45, depending on whether you get it on sale. So let's just look at this thing here. So what you have here is a lot of aluminum fins with a fan on the back to blow air through. And then on the bottom, you see this solid piece of metal here. And what we're going to do is we're going to put some thermal conductive grease on here. And when we set that on the processor, this is going to suck all the heat out of the processor, and that fan will dissipate it out into the air to keep it from overheating. All right, let's set those aside and let's move on to the memory. So the memory we're using in this computer, remember, memory is like the hot storage. When you turn your computer off, everything that's in this memory is gone. This memory is made by a company called ADATA, and Their model is the XPG, and we're using DDR4. That's the most current kind of memory that you'll use for a computer. DDR3 is still in a lot of laptops these days. DDR5, a little faster memory, is in some high-end servers, and DDR5 is in the video card we'll see in a little while. And 2666 is the speed designation here. I could have gone for a little faster, but there's a worldwide shortage of memory right now, and going any faster would have cost a lot more money. We're putting 16 gigabytes in this computer to start. We might go up to 32 in the future, but we're starting with 16, and this is going to be 2 sticks of 8 gigabytes each. So let's open those up and get a little bit closer look at these. So there are those 2 8 gigabyte sticks of RAM, random access memory. And those will go into our motherboard shortly. All right, let's set that aside for now. Next thing, let's look at our cold storage that we're using. So our hard drives and our SSD that we're using for this computer. So we're using 2 hard drive kind of things. This is the SSD. This is the fast one. And this is a 1 terabyte SSD, the 850 EVO model from Samsung. Again, Samsung sells more expensive, faster ones, but this is plenty fast. And this is a 1 terabyte model, and it's very, very tiny for packing a terabyte in there. And so SSD, again, stands for solid state drive. Solid state means there are no moving parts. All there is inside here are memory chips, kind of like the memory chips that are in RAM, except these memory chips, when you remove the power, they keep the data. Similar kind of memory chips to what you might find in a pen drive or a USB thumb drive, except the chips here are much, much, much faster and much more expensive. So this is our SSD. This is what we're going to install our operating system and most of the programs on. And then for the larger cold storage here, we have this Western Digital 8 terabyte drive. Now, let me open this up really quickly and show you what we have. And some of you might question my decision, but let me explain once you see what's in this box. What's in this box, some of you might recognize, is a USB portable backup drive from Western Digital. The reason I bought this is not to use it as an external drive connected with a USB. What we're going to do is we're going to rip this apart and get the hard drive from inside there. We don't need this extra plastic case. What we really want is the hard drive that's inside. Why buy this? Here's the trick. Here's how you can save $100 when you build a computer. You can buy these 8 terabyte hard drives that are external from Best Buy. They commonly put these, there are other companies as well, but Best Buy really commonly puts these on sales for about $160. And what's inside is an 8 terabyte hard drive that costs $260. So why do they sell them for $100 less with this plastic enclosure? Your guess is as good as mine. I'm an economist and I can't explain it. What we're going to do is we're going to tear this open. We'll do that a little later. It's not all that hard to do, but we don't know how long it'll take. It should take me about 1 minute to get in there, but we'll just go through and look at all the other parts. We'll pop that open later, see how long it'll take us. So we're just going to throw away that shell, and we're going to use the drive that's inside there. So we've got our cold storage. Now, next part. This is our GPU, our graphics processing unit.
This is a GeForce GTX 1060. The company is NVIDIA. They brand all of their video cards as GeForce. Their 10th series is what we're on now. This is the current series, and this is the Model 60. This is for the latest models a little bit below, say, the average one that they sell. They have a 1050 Ti, 1060. This is the 1060 3 gigabyte version. There's also a 1060 6 gigabyte version. Then there's the 1070 Ti, 1080, and 1080 Ti. I'm going with the 1060 3 gigabyte. It's plenty for what I need it for. I do a little bit of gaming on a 1080p monitor. You don't really need anything more expensive or higher end than this unless you're going to be gaming in 2K or 4K. And this kind of GPU is expensive enough as it is. To buy one of those higher level 1070s is around $400 or $500 if you can find them in stock. 1080 or 1080 Ti these days are going for $800 to $1,000, and that is close to what I'm spending for this entire computer. It's way overkill for what I need. So this 1060 is going to be really good for my needs. So this is actually a fake unboxing because I've been using this in my other computer for a few months now. But we'll just take it out of the original box and we'll pretend. And we'll show you what this looks like. So here, basically, the GPU, it's got a chip hidden in here that kind of looks a little bit like that CPU that I showed you before. But this is from ASUS, where they have taken the GPU from NVIDIA and mounted some fans on it. And they've mounted some heat sinks. Maybe we can get a little bit of a look behind the fans there, and you can see the heat sinks behind there that those fans are cooling off. Then you see on the end, these are the hookups for where you can plug in your monitors. So we have a DVI, we have HDMI in here. So we have 5 different outputs that you can hook up here. So I'm taking this out of my older machine. I've just been using it for a couple of months. I bought these parts over a few months. I told you about that in a previous portion of this video to save some money. And so this will go in the motherboard. So that brings us to the motherboard. So the company that assembled that GPU card there is ASUS, and it's the same company that made this motherboard, ASUS. ASUS is a great motherboard manufacturer. I've been sticking with them for over a decade now for all of my computer builds. They have had a few missteps in the past, but generally if you buy an ASUS motherboard, you're pretty well guaranteed that this is going to be a good motherboard. So this is the Prime Z370A. The Z370 designation is the kind of motherboard you need to use any of the Intel 8th generation series. So we're using that 8700K processor, and if your processor has an 8 at the beginning, that means you need the Z370 version motherboard. The Z270 will work for the 7700 series, but not the 8700 series, even though the socket has the same number of pins. And that's something a lot of people get confused about. The older motherboard and the older processors still have the 1151 pins, but they're not compatible between the two motherboards. So that's why we have the Z370A instead of a 270 motherboard. So let's open this up and see what kind of goodies we have. We have a user's guide, and in a static protective bag is the motherboard. So let's see how quickly we can get this started here. So here's our motherboard, and basically, like I said before, this is what ties all the other bits of the computer together. Here we have the socket where the CPU will go. These 4 sockets here are where the memory goes, that RAM. These slots over here are where you can put GPU cards or some other things plug into these sockets as well. There are some other expansion slots here for other things that you can plug in. The hard drives, where are the, oh, the hard drives plugs are right back here. So you can plug up to 6 hard drives in here. There might be another hard drive socket hidden somewhere else. This motherboard also has 2 slots where you can plug in a new version of an SSD, where instead of the SSD coming in a metal case like this one that we were looking at, basically the SSD is stripped down to just the internal guts of the SSD. It doesn't have a metal case, and those SSDs can plug directly into the motherboard, and they're called M.2 drives. There's space for one M.2 drive right here, and it basically looks like a little stick of gum. And that little stick of gum plugs in right here, and you screw it to the motherboard right here, and it just sits flat right along the motherboard there. This motherboard also has space for an M.2 drive right here under this metallic heatsink, because those M.2 drives can get warm, and this big metal heatsink here sucks away some of that heat to dissipate it to the inside of the case. This one would just be sitting here, kind of, you'd have to let the air flow over it there. Now, the motherboard also has, as you're familiar with from any kind of computer, it has these external ports that are usually on the back side of your computer for things like your sound output, your microphone input, a couple of USB here. This is where you plug in your network cable for your Ethernet. This also has a couple of video outs. That's if you want to use that primitive GPU that I was talking about before. You can use that GPU in addition to the big extra one that we have as well. And here we also have 2 of the newer USB type 3.1 Gen 2, I believe, is what these are. And this is a USB type C right down here, a new kind of USB that allows you to both put power into some laptops. We won't be putting power into this motherboard through here though, but also very fast connections for things like even external video cards or external hard drives that would run very fast from these types of connections. Okay, now that we have the internal parts all unboxed, let's take a look at the final 2 parts, the case and the power supply. Alright, so let's do the unboxing for the case. For our case today, we are using a Fractal Design Define R5 Black Silent. And the point of using this case, as one part of the name implies, it is black and it is supposed to be silent. So I'll show you some of the features that are supposed to keep some of the noise down from the fans and some of the other whines and other noises that computers can make while they're running. Because if I'm making YouTube videos, I don't want everybody to have to hear all that background noise around for everybody at home to see. So again, this is the Fractal Define R5. This is the back of it. And this one's a little hard to find. They have the R6 out now that is a little different. Let's have a look at the front here. So one thing that makes this a little quieter is it has this front that doesn't have any openings for the sound to get out. When you open this up, it has on the inside over here some foam that absorbs some of the sounds, some of those high-pitched whiny sounds from fans and everything. But so that air can get in and cool it off, we have these indirect
routes for air to be pulled in through the sides on both the left and the right, but the sound has a hard time getting out. So behind here we should see pre-installed a couple of fans. We'll open it up in just a second. Up here we have a couple of 5 1/4 bays if we wanted to put a DVD drive in there. We're not going to put one in this build, but what's going to go up here instead is we're going to pop out these. And what I always like to put in my computer builds in these little bays are drawers. And these are some drawers that I used in another computer and pulled them out, so I've still got some dust and things in there from that computer, so we're going to pop those in there. And these drawers are really great for storing things like thumb drives. You can put DVDs in there, extra cables and other little knickknacks that tend to get lost. Maybe earbuds, things like that too. So we're going to put a couple of those in there. And you can order these kinds of little drawers on Amazon or eBay. There's a lot of different companies that make them, a lot of different styles, and nice little addition instead of having a waste of space up there. So we'll put those in a little later. So let's open up the side here and see what we have. So let me turn it around to the side. There are a couple of thumb screws on the back here. We're going to take both side panels off. So these thumb screws are not captive, they come off. And then I think on this one, yeah, the panel won't open. You don't actually need those thumb screws because there's a little button here that you can push down, and that pops this side panel open. You see it's got that nice sound dampening foam here as well. And here there is an opening if you want to put a fan there, or you can just leave this opening totally closed. Here's a little optional opening that you can open if you want the extra, or if you need the extra airflow to keep your computer cool. I'm going to try to keep this as closed as possible to keep it running silently, but if we ever need to, we can pop that off. Let's put that side panel over here. We're not going to need that until we're done. Same kind of deal, except on the back side, the side panel, these thumb screws are captive. They're not falling off, is what I mean by captive. And that sound dampening foam there, pretty similar to the other side. So let's just have a quick look in here. Here is a rack where you can put a lot of hard drives. Little hard drive trays that come with it here. And you can pop these hard drives in there and just kind of slide them in on these hard drive rails, and they click into place. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slots for hard drives there. So you can put a lot in there. Today we're just going to be putting one hard drive in here, but in the future I'll probably add 2 or 3 other 4 terabyte drives that I have in my other rig currently. Right here is the motherboard tray where we're going to install the motherboard, and you see an opening there so that you can get some cooling in the back, and you also sometimes need to get access to the back of the motherboard, and I'll show you why that is whenever we install the CPU and the cooler. So let's turn it around to the back here. This is where that opening for the motherboard is going to go, where we can have the access to those USB ports and those audio jacks and everything. And then these little slot covers here, this is where the GPU is going to poke through so that we can plug in our monitors. And let's have a look at the back. Here's a little box that every case comes with that has some hardware, some cable ties, screws for the motherboard, and other things, and I'll show you how those work in just a second. But one of the cool things about this case is cable management. And if you don't build computers, this is something you don't think about, but
there are a lot of cables going from the hard drives to the motherboard. There are a lot of power cables and other cables running all through the computer. You want to try to keep these things tidy. This computer, you see, already has a lot of cables in it, but the cables are all nicely tied down with these little Velcro straps here. And there are some little grommets here so that you can put cables through from the front side and hide them on the back of the case so that they're not going to be cluttering up everything on the front side. One other cool thing we're going to be using on the back side here is this little tray, and this is where our SSD is going to go. So this SSD has 4 little screw holes. We're going to screw it onto those 4 little holes there, and this is where our SSD is going to live, on the back underneath the motherboard, nice and tucked away. There's no reason to ever have access to it once you install it, unless for some reason you want to upgrade it or something like that. So it's just hidden out of the way and not going to bother anything there. The last piece of our build here is the power supply. And our power supply is going to go in this hole right here on the bottom of the case. So let's just go ahead and open this thing up, and then we can get to building. So what I'm using here is a 650 watt power supply. The more junk you have in your computer, the more power it's going to need. You can get power supplies commonly up to 1200 watts, 1400 watts, even higher if you really want to. In this build, I think 650 watts is going to be plenty. So, a power supply basically takes power from the wall, right here, and converts it into DC from AC. And then on this side, this is called a fully modular power supply. This is a Corsair RM650i. A fully modular power supply means that there are no cables attached to it. You only plug in the power cables that you actually need to use. If you don't get a modular power supply, it will come with a gob of 10 or 15 cables hanging off of it, and whether you're using them or not, you've got to find somewhere to stuff them in the case to try to hide them. So here are a copious amount of various power cables. Some of them we'll use, and the ones we don't use we'll just leave in the box. So it makes your build a little less cluttered and crowded if you use a modular power supply. They're a little more expensive, but I think it's worth it. And since when you convert AC to DC you're generating a lot of heat, have a fan here for cooling. Okay, that's all the parts we have. Now let's start building.